Hello everybody, thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Helen and I'm the Curatorial and Collections Engagement Coordinator here at Touchstones Rochdale. I'm really pleased that I get to introduce artist Helen Cammock this evening, who is here to talk about her practice, including the exciting project she's been developing here in Rochdale. Us this evening. Helen works across photography, film, print, text, song and performance to explore social histories with a strong emphasis on research to question mainstream historical narratives and excavate unheard, excluded and buried voices. In 2019, she won the Turner Prize along with 3 other artists for her film The Long Note, which explores the roles and involvement of women in the civil rights movement of Northern Ireland. The year before, Helen won the Max Mara Art Prize for Women, where she subsequently spent 6 months on residency in Italy, meeting women and researching lost voices with a focus on the expression of lament. Helen has also exhibited at amazing galleries such as the Whitechapel Gallery, Wysing Arts Centre, Reading Museum and Somerset House, to name but a few. Most recently, she's been working with individuals and community groups here in Rochdale for her latest film, Concrete, Feather and Porcelain Tacks, a commission by the Film and Video Umbrella, Touchstones Rochdale and the Photographer's Gallery, to name but a few. The film will be exhibited here at Touchstones, as well as the Photographer's Gallery in London later this year. Now, there's going to be a chance for a Q&A at the end, so please leave any questions you want to ask in the comments below. But I'll hand over to Helen now. So hello, Helen, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Hiya, thank you, Helen, for that introduction. That's great. So now I don't have to do any of those bits. So I'm very grateful. So thank you. So I've got a PowerPoint that with some images to talk a little bit about my practice before I start talking about the project in Rochdale, which I have to say is very much in process. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about the beginnings of the project and the ideas behind the project, and then some of the work that we've done so far on the project here in Rochdale. So let me just do the share screen thing. Hope I can get this right. We've done a little practice, so it should be all right. Okay, and then press play. Okay, so I am going to read some of this text out to you because I want to keep to time. We've got 40 minutes for me to get through kind of talking a little bit about practice. So all the images are there really to just help you have some idea of how I work, the different kinds of mediums that Helen's already talked about. So yes, I'm an artist and I work in video, print, photography, writing, performance and installation. So different kinds of installations, whether those so all the images are there, different mediums. Really. So sometimes there might be a film that's playing alongside some objects, alongside some flat works, potentially screen prints that are on a wall, for example. So I work in installation in different kinds of ways. I became an artist later on in my working life after having been a social worker in a range of different settings for about 10 years. I'd been singing a lot on circuits and was actually paid to do it from about the age of 15. And before I went to university, I imagined this is what I might do with my life. But after university, I began work and kind of lost the time and focus for singing. There was a moment, though, I guess, where I realized that there was something missing in my world. And this was the space where I was able to be creative. So I kind of described it as this hole that I suddenly realized was present in my life. So I did an evening class in photography and it took me on a kind of the road to where I am now. I decided to change my job. So I gave up, I was working in statutory services. I gave up that job and I started to run a multi-agency support centre for young people, working with lots of different kinds of staff who were supporting young people. And at the same time, I went back and I did a degree in photography. And then after that, I went to do an MA at the Royal College in London, and then very slowly became a practicing artist, always working lots of different jobs while I was doing it. So a little bit about, I guess, my practice and how it works and how I think about it. I guess I really realized early on that everything for me began to flow from writing, how I develop ideas, how I make a sense of the world, the role of language in the way that it can exclude and include, and the place of language to communicate, but also manipulate, to control, but also to investigate and challenge in our everyday lives. So I moved quite quickly from making series of still photographs to incorporating text into my photographic projects, and then finding myself wanting to begin making moving image or film works. So I guess by the end of the second year of my BA, my university degree, I decided that I wanted to start working with film, something that I'd never done before. I mean, I'd always written scripts and songs and poetry and fragmentary text, so this felt like quite an organic transition. So I'm going to say a little bit about the kinds of themes in my work. I'm interested, as Helen said, in history and how it informs and, I suppose, substantiates the present and thus the future. So this idea that if we don't know where we've come from, we don't know what's come before us, we can't make sense of what's happening here now, and then we can't start to think about defining the future or making decisions or doing or acting in particular ways in the future if we kind of don't understand where we are. In order to understand where we are, we need to know where we were before. So that's something, I guess, that runs through the whole of everything I do. Every kind of film, on some level, there's this relationship between the past, the present, and the future. I'm interested in omissions, so what doesn't figure in the history that we understand. I'm interested in unpicking this and in some way representing the gaps, so the kind of spaces, whether they're imagined in the work that I make or whether they're real through the kinds of archival research. I want to represent something that I believe needs to kind of be repositioned somehow in the histories we understand. And for me, histories are multiple and they're circular. They're never single and they're never linear. So this idea of a historical line doesn't make any kind of sense to me whatsoever when you start thinking about all the different kinds of histories that overlap and circle and come back around, and the kinds of waves, I suppose, in political ideas and social ideas that happen across time and generations. I suppose I'm kind of committed to this idea that history is often used to support the maintenance of structural power. So I guess what I mean by that are there are stories that are told and verified and also endorsed in order to keep certain people and communities in position of power and to keep other people without as much power. So I'm interested in whose stories and voices have been left out, erased, or omitted. And we're continually discovering that what we might have understood from the mainstream history is only a tiny part of those who did what, who contributed what, who took credit for certain things, who was actually an explorer, a scientist, a soldier, how civilizations actually developed, and what migration really means to those subjected to it or those undertaking it out of choice. So I use research to underpin all the work I make. So I might use collections or archives. Archives are something that I use on most projects, but what I also use, or what I in my mind think of as living archives, which is the richness, absolute richness of working with living people. I'm interested in how individual lived experience can speak to wider structural and social and political concerns as well all the time. And initially with my work, I focused on my own lived experience through quite personal stories, probably using myself and also my family, who allowed me to do that. But this has evolved over the last 10 years where I may be in the work through a narration, for example, in a film, but it's only obliquely or less obviously my story, just in the way that everything we make or think about is connected to us in some ways, but it's not necessarily entirely our story. And so other people's stories have begun to interweave with mine or to supersede them. For example, in the long note, as Helen described in the introduction, that was a film about women in Northern Ireland, and that was not about my story. And so it was about those voices superseding and so in some ways interweaving with mine, but it was about other people's voices and stories. So I'm also interested in how the impact of all these things, history, experience, and legacy, have on a kind of individual and collective psyche. So this idea about how we feel about ourselves individually, but also how we feel collectively, how that manifests within us. And so the development of individual identity and community identity in its broadest sense, whether that's geographical or whether it's about identity communities, is really interesting and important in the work that I make. I'm pretty cautious of making work that's outside of my experience, but sometimes it's really important to have a kind of external view or somebody coming in with different understandings of what experience might mean. And actually, if I'm honest, it's really important for artists because in terms of commissions, quite often you're asked to come in and think about making work with archives or alongside people in situations that are very different from your own. But one of the things that's really important to me is that somehow you have an understanding of how you sit and fit within that landscape. And sometimes it takes a long time to figure that out, and sometimes it comes much more quickly, but it's something that's really, really important. In order to think about this, I use a range of textual and visual material and different forms of address. So I use poetry quite a lot. I use political text, fictional text, song, philosophical text, and stories, so many stories. So most narratives probably are what I would describe as fragmentary in form, but they're brought together to form one piece of work. And these layers are really important to me because it's like building up a fabric of the work that reflects both the process of research, but also what happens when all of these different kinds of voices come together. I talk a lot about what I call the audible fingerprint and how the voiceover and scripting that I make in films, so the different ways that I use my voice in performance and print, bring me into the piece of work. They enable me to play with and explore ideas of authorship. So this idea that if I say something, it won't be the same as you saying something. It won't be the same as somebody else that's sitting next to you saying it, because we bring all the things that we bring from our experience about who we are in the world, about how other people see us and receive us. And these things are really, really interesting to me. So I believe that we all have what I call an audible fingerprint, and we use it throughout our lives in every situation that we're in. But in performance or in film, I kind of use it as a strategy to have that conversation about what it means to be relational, so in relation to somebody else. Lost my way on my little script now. Yeah, and so there's something about that interests me about this idea of my voice being in dialogue with somebody else's voice, or other people's voices in many ways. So that kind of runs through particularly the performances, but also the films. And this idea of the different registers of the voice are also really significant. So the idea that I use a spoken voice, a whispered voice, a sung voice, the poetic voice, the narrative voice, the political voice, and all these sureties that I use to shift and move around meaning and the way that words are received. So one of the things that I often do is I might sing words that I know are really, really difficult to hear. Whether they're words that are talking about some kind of historical violence, and there's something about being able to sing them, which opens something up in me, but also opens something up in the person that's receiving it. I guess we all know that we receive song in a very, very different way than we receive something that's read to us. So there are thoughts about that. So form and color are important in my print work. So I'm just going to flick through a few prints. This is a series called Shouting and Whispers, and it's a series that's all about asking questions about who we are in the world, what kinds of actions we might take in moments of crisis, and how we might think about what our roles and responsibilities are in the world. And this was made in 2017, but in a funny sort of way, seems to respond and resonate quite well with what the commission here is in Rochdale. So I'm just going to flick through these. So this is a title of a song, but I also use text that I might write, or titles. And so there's something about leaving space for text or very kind of minimalist line drawings as well. So these were from a project, the Italian project, and this is called harp, this is called voice, and this one's called trumpet. So they were all things that kind of featured in the film that I made, but also featured in the performance where I had singing lessons to sing a pre-opera lament, 17th century pre-opera lament, as a duet with a jazz trumpeter. So it was about this idea of experimentation using kind of archival materials. And I worked across different kinds of forms with that. So the move towards a multidisciplinary practice for me was really liberating. The first time I really worked in this way was this show that was called Shouting in, no, sorry, it wasn't that one. It was one called Carte de Visite, which was actually curated by artist Leuven Hamid. And that was 2015, 2016. And I installed a film called Changing Room and some drawings, a projection and lino cuts, and a glass bottle with this kind of fabricated seawater. So this idea of different notions of migration and time and what it means to be an artist were all kind of bouncing off these different objects and different works. And it was the first time I'd worked in that way. I think before that, I'd kind of been known as somebody who made films. And so this was a way for me to kind of step away from that. And what you're looking at now is the Shouting in Whispers installation, which included 2 different print series, a film, an hour-long film, which was made up of YouTube clips and self-shot clips, and a kind of soundtrack that had song and poetry and different other forms of text. And I also made this stamp collection where I juxtaposed lots of different kinds of stamps in order for people to start thinking about what it meant to be somebody in a moment of crisis and what that means. And it was a table where people invited to sit and use a magnifying glass and a microscope, and all of those things were just about this idea of slowing down the looking and the thinking process of what happens socially and political at different moments in time. And I did 6 different performances across the kind of the time, the period of the show, and the scripts for each of those would sit on a stool in the middle of the show each time, so that I almost kind of had my voice sort of had a presence alongside that. So this was from Carte de Visite. I'm really going to quickly flick through these because I'm talking too much. So these were the bottles that were projected, lino cut, and then the actual bottle with the fabricated seawater, which was actually made out of chalk and had to be remade every day. So it's this idea, I suppose, the notion of the imagined, and that we don't always understand or see what is right in front of us. We kind of make assumptions and we read things. That's how we get through life, I guess. And this was the film Changing Room. Right, so in 2018, as Helen also said, I had 6-month residency in Italy after winning the Max Mara Art Prize. I visited 6 cities in 6 months, and as I said, I had a starting point of learning to having singing lessons to try to sing this pre-opera lament as a duet with a jazz trumpeter. But actually that was really only the beginning. So that was the performance that was part of that project. And what I ended up doing was meeting so many people, so many women across Italy who were all able to talk to me across archives, whether I met them through the archive or whether I met them through encounters. So I met an experimental opera singer, a 92-year-old partisan fighter, a dancer who hadn't danced for 25 years after a car accident, a Nigerian woman in Palermo who had found herself for not many years in Italy, a Carmelite nun who ran support projects for women, a woman who'd worked closely with Oliver Tambo as part of an allegiance with the ANC, and this woman here who was a photographer who had photographed some of the most horrific murders in Sicily across particularly one year, 1978. She photographed every murder the mafia undertook in Sicily in that year. So I met some incredible women who sang for me, who talked to me, who introduced me to what it meant to understand lament and loss and longing. And these are just some pictures from the Whitechapel show. It was a 3-screen film that I made. And these were the ones in Italy at the Maramotti collection. So yeah, there was 6-meter hand-pulled screen print that I worked with a wonderful artist who supported me. There's no way I could have pulled that, who basically supported me to kind of create this 6-meter frieze at UCLan, Magda Stavarska-Bevan, who helped me to create that frieze. And then I had a research space, so people could come and see all the different kinds of materials that I'd worked with across the period of 6 months. Okay, I think probably let me just really quickly flick through these to get to the project now. I just put these all in to show all the different kinds of ways that I work. And this was a performance from the Turner Prize. So I was doing a performance one afternoon. Okay, so now on to Rochdale. So as Helen said, this film has been commissioned by Film and Video Umbrella and Touchstones in the Photographers Gallery in London. And I was introduced by Stephen Bow to this idea of equal shares as a kind of overarching theme and idea. And I guess I ran with this. Rochdale is the Rochdale principles I had already, heard about, but it was a kind of opportunity to go to the Pioneers Museum to kind of think about this idea of the significance and importance of Rochdale around ideas of equity, collective and individual responsibility, how we understand and define the stake that we might have in our communities and what it means to overcome situations of difficulty, I guess. And I mean that in terms of historically, but I also mean that in terms of what it means in our everyday lives. So these themes were kind of bouncing around in my head, really, in close relationship to the idea of the cooperative movement that is certainly in the UK and most often spoken about in terms of Western society as the birthplace for the cooperative movement. The role of the mills in the community and I guess the industrial subjugation of working people. So this was kind of the beginnings of my thinking about what will I do? What will I do with this commission that's about equal shares? So I decided to take the idea of equity and collective ownership and start thinking about that in relationship to Touchstones as a museum and also as a gallery. So as a museum in terms of the vast collection of objects which are both in the museum, but really are so full to the brim in the stores that are so kind of well looked after and completely blew me away in terms of how much there is in the stores. And in terms of the kind of the gallery, in terms of the breadth of the kinds of work that there is, historical work and paintings and contemporary work and objects, and from local artists to kind of international artists. And so it felt like this relationship that I needed to somehow bridge between people living in Rochdale and the kinds of materials that were ready and rich to kind of I guess, instigate some of the conversations that I wanted to have about equity and equality and about what it means to be part of a community. So we started off by inviting and reaching out to different kinds of community groups to invite them in to the collection and to start talking about and looking at all the different kinds of objects to start with. And that was before lockdown. So that was before kind of everything went online. So we had a kind of a moment where we did some of that, and we looked at objects like sewing machines, we looked at banners from the trade unions, we looked at football rattles from the 18th and 19th century, we looked at weights and measures that were used in the kinds of shops and the kinds of small businesses that were kind of prevalent in Rochdale. So it was this really kind of rich material, and we started to talk about what that might mean in relation to what's happened in society at the moment. And so we've gone from working with groups to having to kind of hone it down when we went online to try and invite individuals to kind of engage with me and with Laura, who's the producer that I'm working with, we did these kinds of online sessions, conversational sessions, some of which were individual and some of which were small group conversational sessions. And we used some objects and paintings to start having discussions about how people felt about Rochdale today and what it meant to be part of communities and what people did with their time in relation to other people. So those are the kinds of conversations that we've been having over the last, I guess, 6 to 8 months. And so I'm not going to necessarily speak very specifically in terms of the names of people, but there are some images here. So some of the people that we've been having conversations with, until we've kind of signed everything off with people, I'm not going to kind of be talking about people by their names, but there's what I consider, he's a rewilding activist, incredible stories really about the transformation of a kind of piece of wasteland dumping ground that's in the kind of center of Rochdale, that was used to dump old cars and rubbish on, and it's now the most incredible rewilding space for insects and other forms of plant and animal life. So we spent we spent a morning there filming and having conversations about what that means for that area in Rochdale and what it means for the people who are working the land and enabling this kind of rewilding of the space. There was somebody else who I'm going to be filming in July, who was born in Rochdale, part of the Ukrainian community, and she talked about her experiences of school, but also her activism and her kind of community work with the Ukrainian community. And we're hoping that part of the film, we're going to film a Ukrainian women's choir in different sites in Rochdale. Sort of, we're going to choose together different sites for some singing to happen, and then we're going to film that as part of it. We're going to work with some young people from Faylinge School, working actually with a choreographer, thinking about young people moving through Rochdale as a kind of urban environment in terms of the landscape. So working with the architecture, but also working with spaces and places that they might spend time as well. So we've had conversations with one of the ex-mayors of Rochdale, who was the first Muslim mayor, and he talked about the significance of his formative years, both at school, but also spent doing the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which he just talked about how it was quite life-changing for him. And so part of that is going to come in with his story for the film, and also his time working as a probation officer. There's a teacher and an artist who tell stories of her family who had a sewing business at home, about how she arrived in Rochdale. She's an artist now and also a teacher, so we'll be visiting her studio to film, but also her love of walking in the countryside. We have got different community organisers who are working with different kinds of communities, but also a kind of commitment to different kinds of projects. So that's Vintage Works, where we're going to film and use the Faylinge Park, but also some of the activities that happen there. People who access some of the different kinds of support projects that we've been talking to have been really generous with their time and who have taken us to different places where they go to think and to spend time, to reflect, to re-energize, and to kind of reformulate what's going on in their lives. So some of the stories will talk about very, very individual responses to kind of what it means to be part of a community, and some will be much more kind of collective. And all of these stories will, I hope, have a kind of poetry to them. So people's voices will be at the forefront. And the stories that they choose to tell about their life in Rochdale will be very clear, and then there will be moments where there's movement, there's dance, there's sound, there's music, and I'm hoping it will bring some kind of a magical notion to what it means to live and breathe and work in Rochdale. So, and the relationship between a kind of urban setting and the majesty, I suppose, of some of the kind of artworks that belong to the community, and some of the objects that I'd like to play with as well in terms of the collection. Yeah, so this was from the kind of first shoot, and some of the objects that we have been selecting from the archive at the moment. So this was one of the first shoots. So this kind of throne that's come out of the cafe at Touchstones, it's almost like a magical chair as well, that could kind of be in Alice in Wonderland, and then brought into kind of close reflection with kind of some of the social and political things that are part of the collection, and objects that speak of different times and different moments, but also moments that still resonate with people today, through some of the conversations that we had, particularly in one of our group conversation sessions. So yes, that is me trying to give a little bit of a taste of the project. I'm just checking whether I've taken too long, maybe I've been too quick, but I'm happy to kind of talk about other things if there's anything people would like to ask questions about. But yeah, the idea of this film is that really it's the idea is it needs to, for me, to reflect what it means to think about community, what it means to think about equity and equality, and who has a stake in what happens in the communities and the society that we live in. And we will be using Rochdale, the landscape, the space, different parts of the town that people have chosen, which kind of work with the stories that they'd like to tell, alongside all the objects that we found in the collection. So, for example, this is one of the paintings that we use to talk about intergenerational conversation and what it means to learn from people who are older than us, and what it means to learn different kinds of skills, but also to just sit and to talk and be with other people. And in the same way, this painting is also in the collection, and it's doing exactly the same thing. Very different, very different landscape, very different geography, but this notion of kind of togetherness, where people find the space to come together, to talk, to make sense of their worlds, to learn things from each other. And so I've chosen these two paintings, I guess, to give a kind of flavour of the idea of what the film is trying to look at. That's it. That's all I've got to say. Oh, I need to stop sharing the screen, sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Helen. That was great. It sounds so interesting, the new project that you're working on. Has it changed at all over sort of the last 18 months from what you thought it would be, because of all of the, I suppose, restrictions that you've had in being able to do it?
Yeah, I mean, right at the beginning, it was much more going to be a much larger scale film with hopefully having large groups of people that were going to be moving, we were hoping, objects and works around Rochdale itself. So we would be filming in the streets and thinking about kind of group movements where maybe we would be working with 20 or 30 people at a time. And yeah, very quickly we realized that had to change, and we couldn't manage all the kinds of workshops. So we had this schedule where we were going to come and work with different kinds of community groups in the settings that they normally worked in, and all of that had to change as well. And we couldn't actually manage mass workshops online. I couldn't manage them, so we had to think about approaching those community groups and asking them, how could we do it? Could we do it in a different way? And I think the way that we decided would work the best was if we just had a number of individuals and worked more intensely with those individuals on their actual stories, what they would like to tell. So I suppose what's happened, it's moved from a larger scale film that used the landscape and kind of many kind of bodies, I suppose, from Rochdale, and that might have been choreographed in a kind of much more potential, in a way that kind of played with light, landscape architecture and the human body in the landscape. And now it's become a film that wants to do that, but is going to try and work with individuals more around specific locations and the specific activities that they would like to show, do, talk about. And we'll still use works as well from the collection, but in a kind of much more contained way, I suppose. So yeah, I think the flavour and maybe the aesthetic of the film has shifted a little bit because of the pandemic. But yeah, I think it's going to be, I'm hoping it will be equally beautiful and hold the kind of poetry that I wanted from the first idea. So yeah, but it has changed, yes. Yeah,
no, it sounds amazing, like focusing on those individuals and getting their stories out there is, I don't know, it'd be nice to know more about the people of Rochdale and them as individuals, I suppose. And did you find that people were still very willing to be part of your work as individuals rather than as groups?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And I think, I'm hoping that we don't know really, do we? But I'm hoping as the year unfolds a little bit, the summer unfolds, we still might be able to have some of those group situations. There was a group that we were working with right at the beginning who actually came to the archive, I guess you remember, and I'm really hoping that we might be able to reconnect with that group as a group and do something, just as we now have got permission to work with some young people from the secondary school, and so they will be working with us as a group as well. So we'll still have some group situations like the choir as well. So there'll be these moments where group situations come into the film. But yeah, in terms of individuals, people were really generous with their time. We were having workshops, over a period of a few weeks, and people were kind of committing to one a week, sometimes more than one a week, where we could start having the conversations about people's lives, their memories, their different kinds of connections to Rochdale. So everybody I would say, probably has a very different connection to Rochdale. And that makes it incredibly interesting, I think. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm just going to check and see what other questions we have. So bear with me, because I'm not the greatest with computers. Oh, we've got one. As a former social worker, how important do you think the arts are for people's well-being?
I think they're vital. Like, I can't say that enough, really. I think I was, I guess I was working at a time where we had, and particularly the settings that I worked in, we had a lot more scope to use kind of creative practice in some of the projects that I was running. So I ran with a colleague of mine a domestic violence support project for about 7 years on and off, and we used kind of creative activities to have conversations and work through some very, very difficult kinds of things that people were talking about. So as well as it being a wonderful tool for anybody to use in terms of their well-being, I think it's also about people feeling like they have a focus that takes pressure out of some really high pressure situations in life, just generally. I think it's a space for reflection. You can be doing something with your hands, or you can be creating something, or you can be making something quite beautiful, or something quite ugly and destructive. Like, art and creative practice can do so many things. And the kinds of outlets for song and poetry, all of them, I think are vital to everybody's emotional well-being. So yes, I think professionally it should be part of practice in terms of social work settings. But outside of that, I think it's vital to all of us.
Do you think that work has sort of it helps you now when you're working with community groups? So the work that you did before still impacts what you do now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it helped me to develop was to understand how important and how significant it is to be respectful of other people and their lives, no matter what your job is, what your role is, whether I'm being an artist, or whether I was being a social worker, or whether you're a teacher or a curator, or whether you work as a traffic warden. Or you have to you have to understand how important it is to respect other people. And if you demonstrate a respect for other people's lives, and an openness to their lives, then there's this kind of exchange that can happen that is really, really amazing and important. And it means that work can happen, whether it's difficult work in terms of sometimes with social work, and or whether it's easier work, I guess, sometimes in terms of kind of making a film, for example. But it's the same principle, is that you meet people with an openness and a sense of honesty and respect, in terms of what you're looking to do, and then the conversations can flow. So yeah, I bring that with me through that work, and I guess I learned it and developed it in that work that I did. Yeah.
Do you ever find that certain groups or individuals, I suppose, have a wariness around speaking to you at first, or
Yes. Yes, and so should they. Like, I think I believe that that's fine. I think sometimes people are shocked when they feel that people don't want to share with them for their projects, and I think that makes sense. I think you wouldn't just share everything about your life with somebody until you felt that you could trust where they were coming from, what they were looking to do with it, and whether that was something that you were happy with. So I think wariness is never off-putting for me. It makes complete sense, and I would expect often to encounter more wariness than I do, actually. But yes, when I do encounter it, I just think, yeah, that makes complete sense. And it's about a conversation that happens, and either the wariness goes or it doesn't, and that's okay as well, because that's also part of it. People might not want to share or be part of an idea that you think is really interesting, but that's for those people to decide whether they agree with you. So yeah, wariness is fine. Healthy.
We've had, I think you've probably touched on this one, but someone's asked, how have the communities you have been working with responded or reacted to the project? Has it been easy to find people who wanted to be involved?
Well, I probably have done, the team at Touchstones have done a lot of that kind of reaching out, because I think it feels to me that the team at Touchstones are already connected into lots of different kinds of community groups and quite embedded already, and that has made things for me much easier. And I think most people, each of the groups I've gone round to maybe once, maybe twice, to talk about my idea and why I'm doing it and what I think is interesting about it and why I would like to have conversations. And actually, I think from every one of those meetings with a community group or a support project, there have been people who've wanted to be part of the film project, because I think there's one of the things that's come out actually is a real sense of pride, and a real love of Rochdale. And I think everybody that I've talked to, whether they're new to Rochdale or whether they've lived in Rochdale the whole of their lives, there's this sense that it's a place where people can exist and coexist. And so there's been this sense of people wanting to share that. And I actually haven't met that everywhere I've gone on projects. And so yes, I've met with a lot less wariness and a lot more enthusiasm about being part of a project that might say something about the community that people live in. Yeah. Brilliant.
Oh, that's so nice to hear.
Yeah.
We've got one more question, and it is, sorry. Oh, what's next? What are you doing after Rochdale? What's coming up?
Okay, so I've got lots of things that are all happening at the same time. So this summer we'll be coming up and down to Rochdale for filming, and at the same time I've got a project of some prints or posters that are going up across all the underground stations across London. So that's opening at the beginning of July, and then there's a British art show which is happening, also opening in July, which is going across 4 different cities across the UK. And I'm making some ceramics at the moment, which are going to be part of an installation that will appear in the 4 different cities: Aberdeen, Wolverhampton, Plymouth, and what's the other one that I can't remember? Manchester, of course. Manchester was meant to be the opening city, but everything's got rejigged because of COVID. So that's happening. And then later in the year, I've got a solo show that's opening in Belgium, another one opening in Florence. I've got a residency that I'm going on in New Orleans, which is for a new film commission, which will be showing in New Orleans and LA next year. A solo show in Germany, in Hanover, at the beginning of next year in January. So yeah, lots of shows, some of which are commissions for new works, and some of which are kind of old works which are going round and being part of lots of different kinds of group and solo shows at the moment. So yeah, there's lots happening. It's exciting, but there's a lot on. Yeah. Oh, and another project with Serpentine Galleries, which is also happening alongside this one, which is which will be a new film and a book, which is actually working with people who work in care. So either social workers or people who use the and another project provided by different kinds of, which is also happening alongside this one. And we're making what's called a Radio Ballad, which will be a new film and a book. They were made actually by Radio 4 in the late 60s and through the 70s, and they were ballads, so radio shows which had songs, stories, anecdotes, poetry and film, because some of them were then made into TV programs, which showed the lives of ordinary people in the UK, because at that time it was working people didn't really get shown on TV, and they certainly didn't appear so much on Radio 4. So they were the fishing communities in Whitby, the miners, the people that built the M1, young people, people who worked in hospitals. So they all had different kinds of a show so my Radio Ballad is working with social workers in Barking and Dagenham. So that will be part of a show at the Serpentine Galleries next year as well. So yeah,
amazing. Really
yeah, there's quite a lot. Yeah,
I can't wait to go and see the ceramics in Manchester. That's really cool. Now, has anybody got any more questions? No, we're all out of questions, Helen, but thank you.
That's all right. Sorry, I was a bit quick with my talk. Maybe I was.
No, it's brilliant. It was so good. It was really nice to hear about the Rochdale project in more detail. It sounds amazing. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It was
no worries.
Very fascinating.
Thank you for asking me, and I look forward to more filming, more visits, and when the show opens. So yeah,
come back soon.
Okay.
Thanks, Helen.
Right. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.